We call the meeting of the Mecklenburg County Planning Commission to order. We're now going to public hearing. The first item on our agenda tonight is application by Microsoft Corporation to rezone 13.97 acres from agricultural to industrial M1. This is located within the Microsoft BN campus to allow for a circular cloud processing center. This property is zone agriculture, located on the east side of Highway 660 Old Cox Road, approximately 1/10 of a mile south of its intersection with Highway 608, The Ridge. This is in the Boynton District. Is there anyone here to speak for this application? Please come forward and state your name there.
May I take my mask down?
We have been to people this week.
Okay. So my name is Jimmy Epps. I'm with B&B Consultants, president of our firm, and we are under contract with Microsoft as part of the development of this property. And we've been tasked with moving this rezoning forward. This particular parcel is a residual parcel as part of several land transactions, and it actually ended up within the BN campus, surrounded by primarily by Microsoft properties that are all zoned M1. And as we cited this circular cloud center that you referenced, and that facility is actually a warehouse facility that will be used to as sort of a to facilitate the upgrade of servers within the Microsoft data center property. And so traditionally they have shipped servers out as they upgraded them. And in this case, that facility will serve to break apart and scrub those servers on the property as a security element before they leave. And so this is really just a warehouse facility to support the data center operation. And as this facility was cited, we realized that this residual property existed and needed to be rezoned to match the rest of the BN campus, which is already M1. So it's really just a bit of a cleanup effort. And I will say we are also under Microsoft. The BN campus exists as multiple parcels that have been parts of various land transactions. And we are under contract. Once this is rezoned, we will recombine the bulk of those parcels into one large parcel to make it just less cumbersome for siting buildings on the BN campus, so that we don't run into this issue again. So truly, Microsoft is seeking to establish another building within their data center property. As we researched the effort, we realized this bit had been missed, and so we're seeking to rezone it from agricultural to M1 just to bring it up to the same zoning standard as the remaining BN campus.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Is someone else here from Microsoft to speak?
Hello, my name is Anselmo Cruz. Recently moved to this area to support this construction effort. So I'm just here to answer any questions or any concerns that you may have for any of these projects or this effort that we're pushing through today.
Okay. Is there any questions? Okay, thank you. Do we have any calls or letters?
No, sir, no calls, no letters.
Okay. Do I hear a motion on this application?
Mr. Chairman, as for my district, I recommend for approval. And would you like me to read?
Please, sir.
I recommend it for approval. The rezoning will allow future industrial development in the area. It will not be detrimental to the public welfare. It will not affect adversely the health and safety of persons of the neighborhood of the proposed use. The site is located within the Microsoft BN campus.
All right. Motion's been made. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. Give them 1 second. Okay, next item on our agenda tonight is application by Friends of the Mecklenburg River, John Jansen, to amend Article 20, Solar Ordinance, Section 20.5, 2001, 20.4, 20.7, and 20.8. The text amendments can be reviewed at the Administrator's Zoning Office. This is a copy of the text amendments may be reviewed from the Zoning Office Administrator. Is there anyone here to speak for this?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Jansen. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Friends of the Mecklenburg.
Okay.
This evolved out of the public noticing the problems that they were having with the Grasshopper site north of Chase City. It's my understanding that's a 900-acre site with about 500 acres of panels. And the push by the state to get solar in, they streamlined a lot of the permitting process, and they, and Robert, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe they started with a permit by rule program where any application, provided it's designed to a 100-year flood, will be approved pretty much immediately, and that any damage that exceeds the 100-year criteria will not be, or the developer will not be held liable for that damage. And what's happened is with the Grasshopper project, the 100-year criteria as used has proved wholly inadequate. Last year, 2020, there were more than a half dozen incidents that completely overwhelmed their stormwater retention ponds and basically turned Butcher's Creek red with mud from the site, the headwaters where the site is in Chase City, down past the 58 bridge here in Boynton. And typically with a creek system or that type of something like Butcher's Creek that starts with springs at higher elevations, the headwaters are the most sensitive and highly erodible areas of the system. And the reason they had so much trouble with, and continue to have trouble with Grasshopper, is because there's a lot of slope and it's highly erodible land, and it's steep land. And I put a simple handout together. I had some drone shots and things of that nature, but I figured I'd keep it short and sweet. The handout is from right after a rain event in December. The first 2 pages are just pictures of the Grasshopper. This is from a drone flown right off of 47 by the Chase City property line. This is the creek flowing under 47 past the sewage treatment plant for Chase City, at which point it heads south across Cemetery Road 92, down to Butcher's Creek here at the lake. You can see the issue they're having is that by denuding the property and then proceeding immediately to construction, there's no time for vegetation to grow. And that is compounded by the concentration and acceleration of the runoffs with the panels, combined with the fact that you're basically trying to grow grass under a tin shed on a lot of the property now. And in an odd way, thank goodness it's Dominion, because Dominion has the checkbook, as we were speaking earlier, or as I heard you gentlemen speaking, to make this right. But even though Dominion has pulled out all the stops to make it right, they still cannot yet get it under control. And so with that in mind, along comes a project that's 5,400 acres, I believe, that's just northeast of this. I believe it's 7 bridges. Is that right, Robert?
Yeah, it's not 5,400 acres.
How many acres is it?
It's 900 and some acres of panels and about 1,100 acres of land.
Okay. So there's a project twice this size that's proposed in land that fronts, the last drawing I saw of the proposal was that fronts the Mecklenburg River for 19,000 feet.
That's on 7 Bridges Road?
No, sir, that's on, Scotts Crossroads.
Mhm.
It would be between the Grasshopper project and Scotts Crossroads. So it would be north of 47 along the Meharon, kind of northeast of Chase City.
Good and Scott's Crossroad is adjoining Grasshopper.
Okay.
It joins Grasshopper on the backside.
Then that wouldn't be,
Well, they making some tweaks and stuff, I think.
Yeah, they're supposedly working on doing some changes, but they haven't submitted yet.
They had a teleconference last week or the week before where they suggested that they would expand buffers by the river up to 400 feet, that they would carpool employees in and out to mitigate traffic. But they didn't address any of the substantial water quality issues that you're having with the Grasshopper site. And so, very simply, we've proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance in hopes that some of them will be accepted, the zoning ordinance regarding solar, to help prevent these types of problems in the future. Now, that being said, in our position would be, it'd be best, Mecklenburg has enough, but in looking at the reality of the situation and the economic advantages for the landowners and the supposed economic advantages for the counties, we feel like that if these are coming, we want them addressed in a common sense fashion. And so part of the handout I gave you is 22 pages of a report that Dominion did to the governor. On page 18 of that, at the bottom, I'll direct your attention to a heading that says land. And basically the very last sentence on the page says that it can't be just any land. And generally, usable land should not exceed 8% slope. It should require only minimal grading and clearing and grubbing. Further, there needs to be good road and highway access, etc. So of special attention there is the fact that you need to have a minimal slope. You need to have minimal clearing, grading, and grubbing. Jumping back to the Grasshopper site, that was all open pasture. So there was minimal clearing, grading, and grubbing. The proposed site northeast of there, along the Meharon River, will be almost entirely cut over. So there will be 500 or more stumps per acre grubbed up. They will be piled, they will be burned. They will have basically a nightmare controlling erosion. And I don't want to say fortunately, but the Grasshopper site has destroyed Butcher's Creek, which is sort of the redheaded stepchild of creeks in the county. Nobody really lives on it. Nobody really is looking out for it. You've got a whole different situation with the Meharon River, which is now designated a scenic river. And you have a whole different situation with Bluestone Creek with a lot of high dollar homes on it, or Allen Creek or other parts of the county. So the damage to Butcher's Creek has sort of gone unnoticed, and we're working on that, but DEQ, that is supposed to police those issues, has turned a complete blind eye to anything to do with green energy. So they're permitting by right, and then when there's problems with the sites, they're looking the other way, unless it just gets to the point where it's so glaring they've got to give them some sort of slap on the wrist penalty. To contrast that, Barker Construction, while adding 2 or 3 acres over here, trying to put a parking lot in next to the General District Court, was stopped by DEQ because they got a little mud in the creek. During that very same rainstorm, Butcher's Creek ran red for 10 miles at the maximum total suspended solid capacity that you can measure in the water because of the complete failure of the sediment control measures on the Grasshopper site. So in light of all that, we have made several proposals to the ordinance. I believe everybody has a copy of it. I can go through them very quickly. Some of these fit right into what I'm discussing, some don't. But item number one is be careful who you're dealing with, basically. If Grasshopper was owned by some fly-by-night LLC that was owned by some out-of-country LLC, what you'll find is that ownership changes very quickly. They bankrupt the LLCs and move on. Someone else takes it over, tries to mitigate the issue. There's a project called Corona Solar in Essex County. I believe it was only 200 acres. They've had all sorts of problems with it. The difference between here and there is they have the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and other strong groups backing them and calling them out for the issues they're causing. And so they have a mitigation program on up there to replenish or restore what's called Muddy Gut Creek. And that was because a 200-acre project got out of control. My understanding is that since those troubles, the ownership of that project has changed 3 times. So if you're going to do this, deal with somebody that has some backing. These solar sites are creatures of government subsidies. If the subsidies dry up, does the county get hung with them? Is there some way the county can bond the income promised or guarantee it? Number 3, these are not agricultural operations. They are large-scale industrial operations to be considered as those when zoning or modifying. Microsoft didn't come in here a minute ago and ask for a special exception permit or a conditional use permit. They want to put an industrial use on that 12 or 13 acres. They properly asked for an industrial zoning. If you're going to have a utility, which is an industry, then zone it accordingly and figure out how to tax it accordingly. A lot of toxic chemicals in these things. The industry line is that they're contained in the panels. That's fine until you have a hailstorm, a hurricane, some other outlier event that destroys panels. The industry suggests a $5,000 an acre cleanup bond or decommissioning bond. That alone would indicate to me that it's insufficient. I believe that you should have a cleanup bond, maybe 2, maybe a decommissioning bond, but also some sort of environmental contamination bond. Item number 5, environmental baseline study. You know, if you're going to, some of this ties together, but if you're going to put these in, do a baseline study of the wells, of the surface runoff, things of that nature, so that if you have a problem 5 or 10 years down the road, you can determine whether or not it was from something previous or from the solar facility. Then moving on down, number 6, if you detect groundwater contamination, how are you going to take care of that? If you put this in and you have 20 houses on Scotts Crossroads and you're detecting well contamination, is the county ready to run municipal water down that road, for example? Number 7, relation to municipal water intakes. Not really an issue now that Chase City is off their well system, but in other locations it needs to be considered. You can't put a sewage outfall less than 5 miles upstream from a municipal intake or 1 mile downstream. I don't know that the numbers we proposed are what somebody from B&B might recommend, but I think a reasonable separation from, say, the Clarksville municipal water intake and one of these projects is only common sense. Number 8, fish kills, fish habitat, river habitat destroyed. If the Butchers Creek situation happens on the Meharon River, it could be millions and millions of dollars. Who's going to pay for that, or how do you get the developer to pay for that? Number 9, use of toxic chemicals, Teflon, PFAS chemicals, cadmium telluride in particular are known aquatic toxins. They do not dissipate. They do not go away. They accumulate and go up in the food chain. That's what these panels are made of. Back to, you know, proper decommissioning and contamination monitoring. Those things need to be looked at. And number 10 is kind of a wish because you already have the panels here, the economics of replacing them. But if a panel is damaged or destroyed, it, in my opinion, should be in the ordinance that the non-toxic panels need to be used. Number 11, a lot of this stuff's made in China. A lot of the software is made by Huawei, or however you pronounce it, the 5G people that we have all the homeland security issues with. This stuff is hooked to our grids. This stuff is hooked to our infrastructure. We need to use some common sense in how we're dealing with that. Number 13, the solar is all a creature of subsidy. It's not really economical yet. And one of the big problems with it is it makes most of its power when the power is not needed. So there's a big push on to put these battery sites in. That adds a whole new toxic and hazardous mess that is probably best avoided in the county if at all possible. I've heard of counties offering to put in a new fire station or buy a new fire engine to mitigate, possible hazard with the battery or to train the people. But, a lot of this, how to put this nicely, a lot of this reminds me of 10 or 15 years ago when there was a big push on and North Carolina was built out with the hog farms and the intensive farming operations. And they all came here and said, hey, this is great. Look how wonderful all this is. And a lot of the counties here were on the verge of voting for them. And then what happened was they had a hurricane come through, and then all over the media were these disastrous pictures of these destroyed hog farms and washed out lagoons in North Carolina. And most of the counties here said, okay, do we really want this? This is going to be about another 2 or 3 years, I expect, and then all the capacity on the transmission system will be built out. So if you want it, fine, but again, be smart about how you do it and, decommissioning batteries on site, etc. Number 15, this was in mind of all the transmission lines that are already around Chase City. The thought of having to build new transmission lines through the county solely to serve large solar industrial facilities. Our answer to that is if you can't put it on the hundreds of miles of line existing already, you don't need to build it. 16, back to what I said about DEQ and Grasshopper. We've been working with a couple developers in the area on suggestions, and one of them suggesting designing stormwater to a 200-year standard. We realize we're probably not going to get a 500-year, but they need to be designed to much stronger standards, and they need to be maintained throughout the life of the project and decommissioning. 17, common sense, but again, the state is seemingly looking the other way on some of these, but all historic and archaeologically significant sites be protected, studied, documented, dealt with properly. 18, a lot of the initial drawings and a lot of the sites are promising, 200, 300, 400-foot buffer, a timber buffer. They'll be on a large pine plantation tract, for example. They will come in, clear cut the property, and then plant seedlings and call that the buffer. If possible, and if you're going to build, for example, along Scotts Crossroads and you have a timber tract, leave the timber, leave a wooded buffer. Make it a significant buffer. And that, again, don't denude the whole tract and then say, oh, here's our buffer and plant some Leyland cypress. Required setbacks. Again, these are what we'd like to see, whether the county will go along or not. 1,000 feet from a church, 500 feet from cemetery or historic site, 3 miles from an existing solar facility, 1,000 feet from a state road, half mile, 2,500 feet from a scenic road or byway, 500 feet off of any county road, 500 feet off of any occupied residence or property containing an occupied residence, 500 feet from any year-round tributaries to significant creeks or rivers, and a mile from any river or lake. In addition to the VDOT regulation number 20, require that access roads, if possible, come from state roads. You know, VDOT does a good job with access. I don't think we're gonna worry too much about that. 21, I think there should be some size limitations, and that goes in both directions. For example, if the site is a on-site facility, then I don't know that any of this should apply. If the high school wants to build panels to supply the high school, then the criteria of that would, in our mind, be a manageable project. I don't know that we would have any qualms with that. Same thing with a residence or small scale. There might even need to be an exemption of, say, 50 acres, something like that, or under that, the criteria is eased. So we'd like some sort of maximum size limitation. Obviously, the push from the industry is to make them as big as possible to take advantage of the cost of hooking onto the grid. 22, I don't know that anybody can do anything there. Try to get some uniformity among counties so they don't go to the county line on Bluestone Creek and put in something that's going to do exactly what we're trying to prevent. 23, obviously these projects are going in areas that are poor, have high concentrations of minorities. What are we doing to put back some of the revenue into those areas? And is it something that needs evaluation, just like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, in light of the current debate on these types of industries? 24, there's a big debate with the SCC as Dominion is regulated. The SCC has told them that with the smart meter program and with some of these solar sites that they're not economically viable. They cannot pass the cost on to the ratepayers. Dominion and other groups have made a decision to go ahead and proceed anyway. Again, that ties to protecting the county. If the county's promised a revenue stream for 20, 30, 40 years, is the project viable and can that revenue stream be guaranteed? 28, Dominion's book says 8% on the slope ordinance. We asked for 4%. 29, these are supposed to be green projects. The one in Spanish Grove last year looked like a war zone with track hose piling burning stumps. If you're going to call it a green project, then deal with the matter organically without burning it on site. And those, ladies and gentlemen, are our friendly recommendations for modification to your ordinance. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
John, a couple of questions. Who are the Friends of the Meherrin River? What are they composed of?
Sir, back at about a year ago, end of last year, it came to light that they were proposing this 7 Bridges site in Chase City. And so several people that lived along Scotts Crossroads, that the Fagan Boswell family, Sylvia Hall, DeSantis family, several other folks. I can provide you a list of our members today, but a group
Basically
of
around the 7 Bridge.
that's where it started. And now right across the river in Lunenburg, they're proposing another huge site. So we've got plenty of people coming on board in Lunenburg. The problem with these, the current site proposed here in Mecklenburg and the red brick site proposed in Lunenburg, they're on very steep, rugged terrain at the headwaters of the Meharon River. And if you look at the county as a whole, obviously, based on Dominion's suggestion, the gentle sloping, less erodible land, well, most of that's in cropland now or in pasture. And so then the question is, do you really want to take your good tobacco land or your good soybean land or whatever and make that your solar projects? And if you do, that's a decision to make. But anyway, back to your question, a lot of people were up in arms because they didn't know that the project was coming. They hadn't had a public meeting yet, and they started seeing survey flags and people all up and down the road and calling and asking what was going on. And they contacted me, and I believe I asked Robert, and it was about the time that they submitted their application. And so we had a couple meetings. The group had a meeting. So we, as the Friends of the Meharon, had a couple get-togethers. They were open to the public. So the landowner came, a lot of people came. I think one time at the library, we had, maybe 30 people. Then we had another big meeting that the development group put on at the Estes Center, and there were probably 40 people, 50 people, I don't know. And there was a good public debate about it, and the group withdrew their permit to, I guess, regroup and try to address some of the concerns that we had. And they did a conference call, and to back up a little, I think I first started talking to Robert about all this back in March, and then we had the COVID situation. And then we were to meet, I don't know, November or something, and so we finally ended up here today. So we've been talking about this for some time. Everything's sort of been put on hold. And I want to be clear here that we're not anti-solar. We understand the county wants the revenue. We understand it benefits the landowners. We understand, especially during the construction, that it benefits the local economy. The thing we want is we don't want to have what has happened with Grasshopper happen again. And much more so if they're talking about doing it on the Meharon River, or they're talking about doing it, on a shall we say, a more important and more sensitive waterway that the county has found important enough to designate as scenic.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
And I think I'm understanding it correctly. You said that this proposed site joins Grasshopper? Is that correct?
My understanding is that it joins Grasshopper and it goes up to the Meharon River, north of Grasshopper, and then follows the Meharon River. The property it's on, so the site might only be 2/3 of this, but the property that it's proposed for fronts the Meharon River for 19,000 feet.
Okay, so it's this proposed project, whatever it is, it's less than 2 miles from the other project.
Correct.
And that's in our ordinance that can't be so, correct?
It's in the comp plan.
Huh?
It's in our comp plan.
In our comp plan, right? Okay.
But that's not what he's proposing here, you gotta look at what he's proposing.
I understand, yeah, right.
Well, I totally hear you loud and clear of these proposals to change order. And I agree with a lot of them. I think we probably need to do some tweaking our some.
That's all we can ask for.
Especially with the batteries coming and things like that. I look at this picture here that's, I assume that's Grasshopper.
That is, sir, and that's last month.
But I don't think we had no idea too at that time that they were gonna strip every bit of the land, did we?
No,
And looking at that, having a little farm background, I would say it was gonna be a real struggle to get some grass under all that.
Are they
panels.
still, Wayne, are they still regulated by DEQ though, aren't they?
Yes.
But, and I pulled this up to, before I left home a couple weeks ago, somebody sent me a email from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and that's a little different than just from the Chesapeake Bay, what they require from the state level, because, farmers and stuff cannot do but put certain kind of fertilizer, so much fertilizer, different things on the land because of the shed into the Chesapeake Bay River. But, and this is kind of where I stand on this a little bit too. This statement was kind of, I like it said, let's see, the environmental benefits of solar facilities, however, depend greatly on how they are designed, located, and developed. Clearing forest, wetlands, or prime farmland for solar farms can degrade wildlife habitation, diminish the land's ability of natural filter and clean water, leading to more pollution in rivers and streams. On the other hand, solar facilities that make use of degraded or developed land can both protect the waterways and achieve clean energy goals. So, it's like, I don't think we are against solar or green energy, but I think it's a place for them. But, taking up this land and stuff, of course, they're here because our land is cheap, cheaper than where other places. And we got the power lines and running through there. But, I've seen these streams you're talking about. I've been right there and seen them. And I noticed Bluestone is being operated, working on right now. If you go down, not 92, where it's one road that it's on the other side, but if you go down 49, like going to Clarksville, it's one creek there that comes through there, and it runs red 7 days a week. And whether it's one day after a rain or 2 weeks after a rain, it's constantly red. And then you go by 2 more that's completely clean and stuff that's running it. So I think we are in a position to ask these people and, about what we require and stuff like that. And I think with the ordinance and stuff that we got today, I feel like we're okay right now. But I think, as time goes, we're going to have to probably do some tweaking ours personally.
I would, you mentioned the Bay Foundation. I would venture to guess that if this was going on in a Chesapeake Bay watershed, it would have been shut down long ago. And I don't know why the DEQ, well, I do know why, but the DEQ has been wholly unresponsive. They've turned a blind eye, and it goes further. When it comes to the green energy stuff, I mean, Virginia OSHA has turned a blind eye to swapping these meters while they're hot. And, anything to do with green energy is just sort of getting a pass. And I am surprised the Corps of Engineers hasn't weighed in with what's going on, because, this is tons and tons of sediment. And when these significant rain events happen, these creeks are flowing at the maximum amount of silt that they can carry. The turbidity and the total suspended solids, and we've had measurements by B&B, they're the top end of the scale. The water can't hold anymore. And that just shows the total failure of the stormwater system as designed. And that's compounded. If the county was in control, Robert could go out there and say, stop, get this under control, fix phase 1 before you start phase 2. But the county, as I understand it, gives up all rights. Basically, somebody earlier was saying Dominion's exempt. Well, these sites are, for all practical purposes, exempt. And so with that in mind, if you're going to allow one on the Meharon River, make sure that you put additional design criteria on that site to prevent what's happening at Grasshopper. And that's just common sense. I think the developers are, back to the developers I'm working with, designing to a 200-year flood event instead of a 100-year. Build more capacity in your ponds. You might lose a couple acres of panels, but you prevent this mess from happening.
Well, I think, it's the one on Scotch Crossroad, they've been here before.
Yeah.
And then they decided it didn't look good, so they went back. But I would say they got to make some drastic changes to fit into our comp plan. That don't mean it can't get passed and done, but they will wear the line for us, our comp plan states.
Again, I don't think a lot of it is the site. I'm not real familiar with Spanish Grove. It seems pretty flat. I am fairly familiar with the upper Meharon, and it's all steep and highly erodible land. It is the capillaries of the, of the fingertips with the, you can cut off the fingers and the body will still function. It just won't function as well. And when you're dealing with something like the Meharon River, the county thought enough to designate it scenic. They ought to think enough to take care of it. They're promoting tourism on it. They're building parks.
The
So,
lower Meharon is considered city, the upper Meharon were forest stuff.
Right.
No, that's-
and I've heard that a couple ways. I heard it was the upper was considered scenic and the lower was not.
I was, when it was done, it goes until the fork, and the fork for the upper Meharon, it goes up in Mecklenburg to the courthouse, and that's where it stops in Mecklenburg.
Right. So you're saying the lower Meharon all along that crosses like near Fort Mitchell?
None of that. Well, in Mecklenburg, I'm not sure.
Okay.
In Mecklenburg, where the upper Meharon comes into the Meharon River, and from there down to Meharon City, on the there are parts to the west from that or not.
One other thing, I know this is, it raced through my mind, you're talking about storm control. And I saw it in the paper and it was on TV that the state of Virginia was the third wettest, 2020 was the third wettest year we've had. And anybody else see that?
Yeah.
In how many years?
So since been keeping,
Since
Yeah.
it's been keeping records.
Records.
You're right. Which contribute to this,
Uh,
but.
Yeah,
but
I understand. So,
Yeah, but I think storm, you've got, in case you have another one, you've got to have control. But Mr. Lassiter and I spent one half a day looking at this property. There's 7 bridges. We went from one, it's big.
mhm.
And let's say change it, you won't be able to see it from any roads. And I don't recall any
I don't,
slopes or under, of any magnitude.
if you look at Grasshopper, if you're coming up 47, you have to look to see it. If you're going up 49, it's there, but when the buffers grow, it'll be different. Right. I don't think that's really the issue. I think the issue is if you dump particulates of this nature into the Meharon River for 5 or 10 years while you get this site built and under control, you're destroying the river, or you will have destroyed it. And what is that worth to the county? If the site brings in $250,000 a year, is the county willing to sell the Meharon River for that amount? And that's sort of what it boils down to. And that, going back to the design of Grasshopper, I wasn't involved, and I've got to give the engineers the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know how you can design to a 100-year flood criteria and then have a multitude of failures in a 12-month period. Granted, we have more rain than normal, but it didn't all happen in one day. It happened in numerous events. And had their erosion and sediment ponds been twice the size, it probably would have cured the problem. Did they in reality design to a 20 or 30-year criteria, not a 100-year criteria to get in more panels? I don't know. But it's pretty easy really the only shot you have at this is in the initial design. Once it goes to utility status and gets rubber stamped by DEQ and permitted by the state, y'all are done. You're stuck with whatever they build. So how do you address these concerns in that formative stage? And maybe Mr. Carter has some good answers for that, or Mr. Hendrick has some suggestions. I don't do this every day like they do. I don't have the body of experience they have already dealing with these other projects. But we do ask that you take a good look at the problems you're having with the current projects before you approve anything new.
Well, I'd like to make a comment on the Seven Springs there, which Tommy said, I agree. If you ride by it, you won't see it, but I think we will see it in a different way, different types, because that's kind of in my district, and that'll be, we got 3 in the county, and they all in my district. This would be a 4th one. We got another one that's being built, joining my district on Charlotte County side. And then they are putting together, and I think we'll probably at some point be running over in Charlotte County of excess of 6,000 or 7,000 acres coming over there. So I think with all those panels in a surrounding area, you know, I got daughters and stuff building homes and stuff right in that areas and stuff like that. You know, I just, this ain't what I had in mind on country living with these many panels and stuff in my area.
And there's several of our members that are, for lack of a better way to put it, disgusted with what's going on and looking at moving out of the county. And these are people that have been here for a long time. And, you know, how much of this do we really need? Is it really that beneficial? And I don't know those answers. I'm not the economics person, but I do know nobody's banging my door down to file some sort of suit about what's happened to Butcher's Creek. But if this happens to the Meharon River, the county will be in a mess. And everybody will be, it'll be very divisive. It'll be something that this county does not want or need.
I got a question for Mr. Carter and Mr. Hendrick. Of the 29 items that Mr. Jansen has presented, of the 29, what is not already covered in our existing ordinances?
Well, they got the $15,000, $2,000 per acre for the life of the project. We collect a decommission bond for the value of the project, and it stays that way for the first 5 years. Then after the fifth year, it's reevaluated. So it could go up, it could come down, depends on the value of the solar project.
Is there anything else?
The erosion and sediment control, we have a bond that's collected on that. DEQ will not close out theirs until I close out my part. My part has not been closed out. I went out about 2 or 3 months ago and did an inspection, and they wanted to convert the ponds to permanent. I told them it was not ready. At that time, they were working on the E&S of getting the grass planted and refixing some of the areas that had erosion. So we have a bond for that. And that bond is in place until everything is completely satisfied. The setbacks, of course, the setbacks they're asking for is more than what we have right now.
But we do have some in place.
Right, we have a 150-foot setback from all property lines, but that is, I mean, you could ask for more, or you could, you know, if somebody comes in and say, hey, you know, I want to
For
do,
a specific project, we could add more, correct?
right.
Correct. And the reality is, I don't know that there's any place in the county you can fit one of any size based upon their setback.
Right.
And they also required, I think Grasshopper had like 17 restrictions on them that they had to do, and all of them are not completed yet. And they, you know, if they don't complete them, then I have the bond that we can advertise, have somebody go out there and finish it, and they pay for it.
If the owner does.
If
Right.
the owner, right.
Yeah, is
In that
there,
case, the owner of that property is dominion, so therefore, you've got someone to go back against to get those items done.
well, how long does that continue on till you take action? I mean,
The erosion and sediment control part of it, or
how
DEQ?
long are you gonna let that coast along?
I don't let it coast along. I give them a time frame to get it fixed, and I go back and check.
Okay.
Now, the part dealing with the stormwater management, I don't have any control over that. That's DEQ.
And therein lies the key to some of the problem, where if you don't put greater controls on the size of the ponds and things up front, Robert, as he just said, does not have any control over that. That's DEQ. Well, I'll flat out tell you, DEQ isn't doing their job. And I would venture to guess, I don't know what the bond is for Grasshopper, but if they had to do any type of significant mitigation on Butcher's Creek, it wouldn't be enough to cover that either. So, you know, those are things that I think should be considered by the county.
Well, John, I heard you loud and clear, and I totally agree with a lot of what we got on here, but I think it's made us aware of maybe some questions when they come here to present a project, some more questions we can ask and all that. So, nothing against what you brought, but, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that, recommend of denial of this right now. And for the reason that it's Mecklenburg County currently has a solar ordinance that was approved November the 6th, 2017, and it's consistent with the current comprehensive plan. The current solar ordinance covers many of the requested amendments. Stormwater management plans and erosion and sediment control plans are developed and approved under state regulations. The county requires a bond or decommission for the life of the project. The county requires a bond on the erosion and sediment control plan and the stormwater management program. The development is required to complete an impact study of this area.
Okay. Motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. We're now going to close public hearing. Approval of the December 3rd, 2020 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we have reviewed the minutes and made any corrections that we needed, and I move that we approve those minutes.
Motion's been made to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Administrator, sir.
Everybody should have a copy of the building permit, zoning permit report. Any questions on those?
I don't think so. Thanks.
Any questions? Things are still staying pretty busy.
Sir?
I said things are still staying pretty busy.
Still pretty busy. Okay.
I have not received any applications for our January meeting. I'll send y'all's letters out.
In the application that he was referring to earlier, that you haven't gotten anything.
I've only got review information. Nothing has been submitted.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Well, we can keep a lot of his ideas in mind then when that comes before us again.
Yeah, that's like I was saying, when they file a special exception permit, y'all can, what's in writing, you can put stricter recommendations on it.
On Dominion Power, do they pay taxes on the property of Grasshopper now?
They pay,
Property tax on December the 5th and June is, they do pay property tax.
all of it is set at real estate rate. This year they would have paid any because it goes by whether they were operational on July 1. So in the current year, they were, that's my knowledge, they were operational July 1.
No.
So you will go in on next year's thing, okay? Because just like you have a house halfway built, you want it completed July 1, you're gonna do, partial assessments, we do a full assessment. When your house is completed, then you get the bill. Theirs will be the same one.
Okay.
If it's done on this year, it will be on next year.
Next year.
But they don't have to pay, what is it, the building permit like Bluestone would have had to?
No.
That's by being Dominion, they got out of that.
That's a ruling from the Department of Trades that they are exempt, just as if the co-op does it. If the co-op builds a solar facility, they also do that. Power companies are exempt from the code.
Now, another question, just kind of clarify in my head. You inspect
E&S,
the E&S controls. Does that not include the stormwater ponds?
not on my part.
Not
That's
on
done
your-
through DEQ.
But, and with that said, even if you take that over, it's still to the same regulations that DEQ is. You
Yep.
can't come out and say, we're gonna require a 500-year storm. If the DEQ's regs say this, you have the same regs.
Okay.
It's the same all over the state. It's not like one county can have one reg and one another. It's the same also with building permits. It's the same regulation across the state.
You can't impose stricter regs on that.
And what they did in Spotsylvania County on that one, where people have discussed about, they limited because that one does have some very difficult topography. My understanding, it was very steep slopes. It also had some highly erodible soil. So they limited them in the areas that they could do in the amount till they got grass established. But there was such a large area that one was 5,000 acres. About 2,800 of it in panels, Robert,
I think so.
something like that. So what they did was they blocked it up in 50 acres. So and this was an agreement between the developer and the county. They blocked it up and had to put in all ENS controls, get things done in a little different fashion because they were also at the headwaters of a rare mussel. It was in the river there. And in order to protect that, get that covered through some of the permitting agencies, they did some things a little different on that site. But for example, you already have historic resources has to sign off on it, things like that. Those are actually still in regs. Many other things, for example, items that he discussed with regards to state corporation commission, you have nothing to do with. You cannot by law. You can't make a moratorium, things of that nature. So there's some parts of it that you're right, Mr. Franklin, we need to look at probably better. And when we did Grasshopper, that was the first one. That was really open land, because the other ones were timbered land. A few fields that were on bluestone, and Grasshopper was too little. And what we were told was, we will leave all the grass there, we will drive those posts in the ground.
Yep.
And then, you won't have anything disturbed. That's what we were told, and we believe it. Sometimes you learn from your mistakes. That one, I don't believe y'all will be doing that again, something that's open land like that. You can look at trying to limit the amount of areas like they did in Spotsylvania that are open one time until they get it done. Limit the amount of excavation. The reality is on Bluestone, because the vast majority of it, Bluestone, the vast majority of it was timberland, you had to dig it all.
Right.
Because there's no way you could drive the post through all of it. But it just depends upon the site. We're going to have to look a lot closer. I would say, like with anything, you learn from your mistakes. And there were some that we've made, and not just here, other places also. I think we just got to, as we go through this, take a longer look at it, and a harder look to try to figure out what we can do. If that's what you want as a solar facility, then we need to look at what we can do to protect the environment, etc.
Well, Robert, do you know when DEQ comes or how often they come or anything?
Normally, well, they've changed. Brooke used to would notify me when he's coming up, but they have a new person. They let me know when they're coming up to check Microsoft, but when they come up to do the solar facilities, Brooke would let me know about Bluestone, but not Grasshopper.
Well, I mean, like, I'm talking about that stream then running red all the time. I mean, who reports that to DEQ? Surely, Bluestone's not gonna call it in.
Well, when DEQ goes out to do the inspections, they should pick it up on the stormwater management part of it, of the way the water's being released. Since I've got Jesse here to help me in the office, I'll be able to get out more to these sites and check them. And of course, I had to shut down Bluestone, about a month ago. Yeah, before Christmas, for the simple reason they just covered the road up. And, I met them on a Monday and I went back on that Wednesday, nothing had been touched, and I shut them down. And it took them 2 days to get it clean and back to where I would let them go back to work. On the ENS part, like I was telling you, if I go out and it's an issue, I will give them a week to get it straight. If they don't, I go back and write them up.
Well, according to regulations, they have a certain time period anyway.
Yeah,
Correct?
they have a certain time period to do your corrections that you write them up for.
Right.
I think I can't swear to it. I have to go back and look at my file. But I do believe Grasshopper got a notice of violation from DEQ.
That's,
Bluestone has, Microsoft has, and the school has. They copied me on all those notice violations.
okay.
So DEQ is doing the job.
It's just been extremely wet year.
Yeah.
We all know.
Right.
And you said, Charlie, third wettest, the issue comes in this year. He's going out doing some inspections. They can't get everything all the time.
Right.
And even with us, for example, you have to have it dry enough that you can get back out and fix the area wherever it got damaged or destroyed systems. If you does hit 5 inches of rain, you can't put a piece of equipment out there, try to fix it, because you will do more damage trying to do that than you would have if you gotta give it 3 days or 5 days for it to dry out enough to get out there. And that is an issue that we've had, because we've had large periods where we haven't, since probably November, ground has dried out at all. If you've been on it anywhere, it's mud. And it only takes a half inch of rain and water standing everywhere. So it's been a very wet year. But all of them, I will say that, everybody in construction.
And Grasshopper, Dominion Power did have a inspector out there on site. And if they had a blowout or a spillage go over the silt fence or whatever, they were on top of it. They reported. I got every one of the reports right there in my folder, because they would copy me on it. They would copy DEQ on it. So Dominion Power had somebody on site every day, and if there was an issue, it was reported.
Okay.
And just like at Microsoft, the pond was built the standards. We had 6 inches of rain. It blew it out. They blew it out before they could get it stabilized. So, that's some of the stuff that you run into.
I know,
You can't control Mother Nature.
you talking about with construction too. I know, because I work with VDOT, we had multiple roads wash out over 25. So it's been an extremely wet year. So.
I got a question. The panels that they talked about here, that he proposed using, the ones that we're using now, or they are using now, are toxic. And he's saying, don't get them from China, make sure they're US made. How is that written in our ordinance?
I don't think we can tell them where to buy the panels from.
There are 2 different kinds.
Yeah.
One has a wafer board in it. One's got like wafer
I can't remember.
But the silicon ones and then the wafer board, they're considered what's considered special hazardous waste by DEQ.
Yeah.
So what that means is, for example, you could take them in a landfill. My landfill, like the original pit. We don't take any special waste, but it's just like you could have a landfill that takes asbestos. Asbestos, the idea there is you're not going to run equipment through it, because then it comes fire, it gets in the air. Asbestos doesn't leach in the ground. So the old landfills that they used to have weren't even lined for asbestos, because it didn't affect groundwater. You were just literally covering it with several feet of dirt and not compact. Okay? So you just shove the dirt right on top of it and continue to seal it that way. You could do something similar on panels. I know there were a large number of them taken from Grasshopper that got destroyed by heavy equipment. They went to a landfill. They did not come to our original. Where they went, I do not know. But they can be, they're declared by DEQ as special hazardous waste.
So when they are disposed of, they are taken to a facility that handles the toxic panels, if that's what they choose.
For example, you don't want to crush those panel boards up, because then that can release that wafer board into the environment. So what you would be doing then is basically setting them, stacking them, and covering them back up.
Good. Thank you.
As an example.
Right.
So you literally just take a section, you might put 8, 10 foot high, just stack the panels side by side, and then push the dirt over top of it. Several feet.
Yeah, so I wasn't suggesting that we could tell them
Oh.
where to buy, but what types to buy. Could we suggest that to make it less
Something we can take
toxic?
a look at.
One
Yeah.
of those things we need to look into.
I don't know. Is China the only place that makes them?
Now, there were several, the original manufacturers were mostly in Europe, Germany a lot, but the company that made them there, I think, went bankrupt because they basically stopped making them. And they said that they saturated their markets and didn't have any. and their cost of production is much higher than China. So therefore, most of the panels are made overseas, the vast majority.
Yeah, I know grasshoppers work.
Someone else can make it at that cost.
But, we could get some things together, couldn't we, Robert, to,
Hey, yeah, these could be some things that, and when they submit the SEP, that you could put the restrictions on, or I can sit down and look at it and try to figure out a way maybe to update our zoning ordinance. I'll let Russell look at it first.
Okay.
Um,
And we might be able to negotiate with the applicant, certain conditions.
yeah,
okay. That would be good.
I think maybe if we did it as the conditions and versus putting it in the ordinance, might be a better way to go than putting it in, put it in the ordinance. Because like I said, anytime, anybody that submits a special use permit, you can put restrictions on them, regardless of who it is or what it is or what it's for.
Okay.
I mean, that's an option that y'all have, even if it's not in the ordinance or the comp plan.
Well, maybe if you could maybe get us a few suggestions then on some of that stuff we discussed.
Since you got more time.
I gotta play catch up.
All righty. Is there any other questions or discussion? Do I hear a motion? We adjourn. Is there a second?
I've,
All those in favor, get up and run out.